now going to show you a recording about the pyramid of influence. And so I'm going to include that next. It's not going to look exactly like you see the look in here, Phil, but I did it well enough that I want you to hear about the pyramid that I think influences people. Enjoy this next segment.
My name is XN Anderson. Welcome to the Extreme Influence for Dads course. Today we're going to be talking about principles of how we influence our children and our families for good. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about principles. What is a principle? What is a principle? And before we get started, I just want to talk about this concept really quickly. A principle is something that's bigger than me. It's bigger than you. It's bigger than all of us. And it's something that's really, really real, whether you believe it is or not. Let me give you an example. There's a scientific principle called gravity. You've heard of it. Gravity works everywhere that we know of. I mean, gravity works where I'm at. It keeps me sitting in my chair right now. Works where you're at. It keeps you on the floor. It works everywhere. I mean, gravity works on every continent, North Pole, South Pole. It even works in outer space. I mean, it's what keeps the moon going around the Earth, keeps the Earth going around the sun. Millions and millions of miles away, there are clusters of galaxies that are spinning around, held together by gravity. It's everywhere. Now, when you come in contact with any principle, you have a couple of options. You can either respect it and align with it, or you can ignore it to your peril. So those are your two choices that we're going to talk about today. I can align with gravity, or I can ignore gravity. And any principle in life, let's talk about gravity first, we'll talk about principles. So let me ask you a question. How could you align with gravity to, say, make you money? Well, I've asked this question to audiences all over the country. In fact, even audiences internationally. And I've asked people, how can you make money using gravity? And these are some of the ideas that I hear. You could build a ski resort. In other words, you could have people fly into your ski resort. They could take a lift up the mountain, and then they would have this thrilling experience pulled down by gravity, hopefully in a beautiful place. You could build a bungee jumping company. You could build a ski resort. You could build roller coasters. There's a lot of things you could do with using gravity and aligning with gravity. You could even build a dam across the river and have the water flow through the dam and turn turbines and make electricity for millions of dollars. You see, gravity is everywhere, and I could align with it and maybe build a hydroelectric dam or a ski resort or roller coasters or a bungee jumping company or skydiving company and probably be very successful using gravity to my advantage. On the other hand, if I ignore gravity, what could happen? What if I'm careless with or ignore gravity? Well, that's right. I could fall off a cliff. I could even get injured, maybe even die. So gravity is really real. I could align with it and have it help me be successful, or I could ignore it and get injured and be really in bad news, maybe even die if I ignore gravity. Gravity's just there. Now, if we're going to learn how to influence our families for good, we need to figure out what are the principles that we can align with. Because I'll tell you this, there are principles in relationships. There are principles in human relations. There are principles in marriages, in dealing with our children that are just as real as gravity. And we have a choice. We can align with them, or we can ignore them to our peril. So you can choose to do anything you want in life. You can choose to do anything you want in your relationships, but you do not control the consequence. What controls the consequence of your actions? Well, I'll tell you. It starts with a P. It's principles. Principles do. So if I go to the edge of the cliff and I say, I'm going to jump off the cliff. And let's just say I believe I can fly. Let's say I believe I can fly, and I jump off the cliff. What controls the consequence of my action? Well, gravity does. The principle of gravity controls the consequence. Now, sometimes people use this word principles differently than I do. Sometimes people say, well, you have your principles and they work for you, and I have my principles and they work for me. Those are not the type of principles we're talking about. Those I would call values. In other words, you can value something, but that does not mean it's an actual principle. Values are kind of like the map that we hold in our heads. Like we think we value certain things, hoping that it will get us a certain result. But Principles are the actual terrain. Did you hear that? Principles are what's actually there. Like gravity's there whether you believe in this or not. Now, I may choose to value gravity. I may choose to align with gravity, and I might choose to build a hydroelectric dam because I value the power that gravity can help me with my business. Or I could ignore gravity and value ignoring gravity and possibly be injured or even worse. So values are what we have in our head. The terrain is the actual principles that are actually there. And to the extent we can get what we value in our head to match up with the terrain, we'll do better. So if our map matches what's actually there, we'll do better. Now, there is actual terrain. Sometimes people think there's no terrain. It's only what you value. Everything's relative. That's not true. Gravity is real, whether you believe it is or not. And there are principles in human relations that are real, whether you believe them or they are not. And because principles control our consequences to our actions, it becomes very important to figure out what are those principles. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about one principle that's really important. And I'll tell you, my career has been in sales. In my career, I've done a lot of sales. I've worked with people for most of my career. I remember one time somebody called me up. This was many years ago. I was working for a company that my job was to answer the phone and to help people buy things that were on the phone. Now, by the way, I was on straight commission, okay? Which means I didn't get paid unless somebody bought something. Well, let me give you an example of what happened here. Somebody called me up and said, hey, I'm thinking about buying this one particular thing. And then they asked me a really interesting question. They said, would you buy it from you guys? Now, remember, I'm on straight commission salesman. I only get paid if somebody buys something from me. And I had a choice. You see, honesty is a principle. It's a principle as real as gravity. And I had a choice. Am I going to align with this principle or am I going to ignore it to my peril? And so luckily I decided to align with it. I said, you know what? Don't buy this particular product from us. Just go on Amazon. You can get it cheaper. Now, some people who are in sales may think I'm crazy. I said, well, you didn't make any money if you didn't sell it. And I said, you're right. But I needed to be honest. I needed to align with this principle. And here's the thing. I did not make that sale. They did not buy that particular product from me or our company that I was working with. So or the company that I was working for, I should say. Anyway, what was really interesting is that by the end of the call, they made a massive order of something else. Isn't that interesting? They made a massive order of something else that was dozens and dozens of times bigger than the product that they originally called in on. And I really think it's because they knew that they could trust me. They knew that I was a straight shooter, right? Now, here's the thing. Honesty is a principle. It's as real as gravity. If you want people to trust you, you've got to be honest. There's no other way around it. And we've got to walk our talk. So I'm going to show you this pyramid right now because this is super important. On this pyramid, we have what are called, I kind of divide it into two things. On the right-hand side, it says actions. On the left-hand side, it says the hoped for result, right? Now, if we align with principles like being honest, like walking our talk, put that over there in small letters there, the result is that people will trust us, okay? There's no way around this. If you value being dishonest, if you value saying, I'm going to lie and cheat and steal sometimes, I'm not going to walk my talk, I'm going to tell people to do one thing, but I'm doing another. The result is that you don't get trust, okay? So as a dad, what we need to do is remember, if I want people to trust me, I've got to be honest, and I've got to walk my talk. That's the first layer to the pyramid. Now, here's the next layer. By the way, let's read this quote from Warren Buffett. It says, somebody once said that in looking for people to hire, you look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if you don't have the first, the other two will kill you. Now, I want you to think about this in the context of being a dad. Of course, this quote is from Warren Buffett. He's looking for people to hire. But in some ways, our children, our spouses, they've kind of, I don't know if you could say hired us, but they're stuck with us. And he's saying, if you want to have someone on your team that's valuable, the first thing, the most important thing is to have someone with integrity. In other words, you can be super smart, you can have lots of energy, but I've got bad news for you. There's a lot of bad people who are really smart and have lots of energy. What you want to do is be a good person, which means you have to have integrity, right? You can be smart, you can have a lot of energy, but integrity is more important. It's more important for Warren Buffett, and it's more important as a dad. It's more important in our families that we have that integrity. Now, let's move on. The next step here is we need to build the relationship. Now, there's a lot of ways to try to build the relationship. Okay? Let me talk about a couple with you right now. So I'm going to tell you a story about me. I was at a bank. Problem with my account is that I didn't put money in the account like I should have put money in the account. And my account was in the red. It was overdrawn, severely overdrawn. In fact, had lots of bounced overdraft fees. Now, I was embarrassed about this, and I said, gosh, I got to go down and figure this out. This was many years ago when you had to go to the bank more than you do probably today. A lot of things you can do right from your phone. You can do deposits and all kinds of things from your phone. But in the old days, you had to go to the bank more than you do now. And I went to this bank, and I tried to get this problem fixed with my account. I went to the gentleman there, and I told him about my problem. And we'll call this gentleman Jeff. He was very professional. He was very courteous, and I put the money in like I should have. He was very he was very nice and waived a bunch of the fees. Put the money in like I should have. Got my account back from the red into the black. And when he was done, I looked at Jeff and I said, "Hey Jeff, can I get the email to your boss?" Now, Jeff looked at me kind of funny, like, "Well, why do you want the email to my boss?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to tell him what a great job you did." Now, when I said this, there was something about his reaction that I could tell he wasn't used to getting positive feedback. He was more used to getting negative feedback. And he did, but he ended up giving me the email to his boss. And I took that email and I went home that night. I had his email as well from his card. And I typed up an email that said something like this: "Dear Mr. Branch Manager, I had the opportunity of working with Jeff. He was very professional and helpful. I think he deserves a raise and a promotion." Now, I sent it to Jeff's boss, and I copied Jeff on it. I didn't think anything else about it. Well, fast forward a little bit. I came back to the same bank maybe a week or so later, and I'm standing in line. There's probably 10 people in front of me in line. And remember, this is back when you had to go to the bank a lot more than we do now. But I was standing in line, and something happened to me that had never happened to me before. Somebody came up to me and said, "Mr. Anderson," which was a little odd because I live in a big city and most people don't remember people's names. He said, "Mr. Anderson, may I help you with your banking?" And I was a little bit surprised. I said, "Well, sure." He said, "Well, follow me." And he took me from the back of the line, took me over to a desk, and let me do my banking in front of everyone that was in line. You would have thought I had $10 million at the bank, which we all know that I didn't. Well, this happened again and again and again at this bank, where I would be treated like a king. I'd be allowed to do my banking in front of everyone else. And it didn't start happening until I had written this nice email about Jeff and sent it to his boss. Now, you might ask, well, what does this have to do with dads and parenting? And we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to ask first, what do you think happened at the bank? And the answer is, I don't know for sure. I could guess that Jeff probably said something to somebody, and somehow they may have thought, "Hey, I want to get a letter too," or maybe he said something to the boss, and the boss said, "Treat this guy well." I don't know for sure what happened, but I do know that I wasn't treated like that until I'd done something nice for Jeff. Now, let's fast forward a little bit. Fast forward several years later, I'm sitting in a high-level director's office in New York, and this guy looks at me and says, "You are the only salesperson I've ever let into my office." Now, I'm not going to tell you yet what he said next, but it was really interesting to me. What did you think I did to get an appointment with this high-level director in New York? And what does this have to do with dads? We'll get to that. Well, this is what happened. I'd sent an email to this guy. He completely ignored me. Didn't respond to my email. Completely ignored me. I called in several days later, maybe a week later or so, and I tried to talk to him. Who did I run into? Well, his gatekeeper. I call him gatekeepers. I ran into a secretary. When I ran into a secretary, his secretary, I said, "Can I speak to," we'll call him Bob. "Can I speak with Bob?" She said, "He's unavailable." Now, that's what most secretaries say when you're trying to talk to decision makers in organizations. And what I said to her is, well, maybe what I could do is resend the email and copy it to you. Would that be okay? She said, "Sure." So what I did is I pulled up the email and I decided to send it to Bob again, but copy it to Janice. Now, here's the interesting thing. Have you ever have you ever heard of anyone who is just has kind of a bubbly, fun personality? You can almost hear them smiling on the phone. Have you ever been on the phone and been able to hear someone smiling? Well, Janice, we'll call her Janice. She was kind of like this on the phone, and I noticed it, and I said, you know what? I appreciate you being so courteous and friendly. I speak to people all day long in my job all day long, and I appreciate you being so courteous and friendly. Thank you. And she said, thanks. Then I said, you know what? I'm going to mention that to your boss. And she was a little surprised. We said, thanks. I actually typed an email that said, hey, I had the opportunity, dear Bob, I had the opportunity of speaking with Janice briefly. She was very professional and helpful, something like this. I think she's an asset to your team. By the way, I'm going to be in New York on these days. And I sent it to Bob, copied Janice on the email, sent the email. And then I asked her, I said, hey, did that email come through? And she said, it did. And thanks for the compliment. She kind of paused and she goes, yeah, the email came through and thanks for the compliment. So now fast forward back to where I'm sitting in this high-level director's office in New York. He's just barely said, hey, you are the only salesperson I've ever let into my office. And then he said something interesting. He said, the reason you're here is because you were nice to my secretary. I talk to my secretary more than I talk to my wife. And some of these sales guys don't understand that. Now, I thought that was really, really interesting. Now, listen to what he didn't say. He didn't say, hey, you have a great website, and that's why I let you in. He didn't say, hey, you've got great social media. I've never seen anybody tweet 4,000 times than you did. He didn't say that. He said, you're the only salesperson I've ever let into my office, and it's because you were nice to my secretary. Now, what does this have to do with principles? What does this have to do with dads? What does this have to do with relationships? Well, let me tell you, what was the principle that I aligned with that got me treated like a king at the bank and got me in front of this high-level director in New York in a sales situation? What was the timeless ancient principle that's as real as gravity, that's as real as honesty? I'll tell you, it's a principle called the golden rule. It's that we treat people like we want to be treated. Now, that principle, whether you believe in it or not, that we should treat people like we want to be treated, is as real as gravity. Now, you can pretend like gravity doesn't apply to you, or you can be mean to people or be a jerk to people, and that it doesn't apply to you. But the truth is, it does. Now, let's take an example. What if I'd gone to the bank and acted like a jerk? What if I'd been a bully and said, I can't believe that you guys, I make one mistake and you guys charge me all these fees, and now you better fix this. And if you don't fix it, I'm going to tell everybody what a bad bank you are. Could I have gotten them to fix my problem? And the answer is maybe. In the short run, maybe they would have complied. I could have kind of bullied them into doing it. But what would have happened when I came back to the bank a week later? Would they have treated me like a king? Well, the answer is no. Probably not. They probably said, watch out for that guy. He's a little bit of a time bomb. And by the way, make him wait a little longer because he's a little bit of a jerk. So me trying to get a short-term result by being a bully might have worked in the short run. In the long run, it didn't work. Now, I can align with the golden rule, which was treating Jeff well and treating Janice in New York well. And the results that I want happen because I aligned with the golden rule. Well, some psychologists don't like to call it the golden rule. They like to use other terms. And one of the terms that they use to describe a part of the golden rule is called positive reinforcement. They say, you know what? I know what you did. You did something called positive reinforcement. Well, what is positive reinforcement? Positive reinforcement is behaviors are like seeds and attention is like water. If you can imagine that I have a pitcher of water in my hand, I'm watering the behaviors that I want to see grow with attention. Now, have you ever seen a parent, maybe you've been this parent yourself, where the kid walks in and you say something like, can't believe you didn't make your bed, and can't believe you stayed up till 3:00 in the morning, and you're watching too many video games, and you're getting a C- in math. Well, what are you doing when you do that? If behaviors really are like seeds and attention is like water, when you water behaviors with attention that you don't want, you're actually making those behaviors more likely to happen. Well, this is important. If I want to get the results I want to get as a dad and be able to influence my children for good, I've got to align with real principles that are as real as gravity. That's the base of the pyramid. If I don't align with principles, first of all, people don't trust me. If I don't walk my talk, they don't trust me. But then I got to figure out what are the principles that are going to make it more likely for me to have the results I want. Now, you've got to realize people are not machines. They're not robots. You can't just assume that people are going to do whatever it is you want just because you do the right thing. People can still choose differently. And we're going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about change and how you can change yourself. But we'll get into that in a later subject. But what are the principles here that that I aligned with? Well, both in the bank situation and New York, the principle that I aligned with was the golden rule, which is super important. Catch people doing something right. Positive reinforcement. Watering behaviors you want to see grow. Now, here's the thing. Are we as dads watering behaviors that we don't want to see grow? In other words, are we pointing out behaviors we don't want to see grow? Now, there was a book called The Power of Positive Parenting by Glenn Latham. Super good book. Highly recommend that you get it and read it. In this book, they tell a story that I believe goes something like this. There was a boy in the book who was being sent to the principal's office all the time. It became such a big deal that they decided to get the school counselor involved to see what they could do to try to fix this problem of this boy getting sent to the principal's office all the time. Out there in the back of the room and observed the boy. And the counselor observed that the boy was doing a lot of things right. I mean, he was listening, he was doing some things that were right, but the teacher was giving the boy zero attention. But every time the boy would do something wrong, a lot of times he'd start getting attention for doing what's wrong. In other words, the teacher would say, "Oh, there you go again," and write his name on the board. Then they'd put a check mark next to his name when he did something else disruptive. Then they'd do another check mark, then another check mark, then another check mark. Soon this boy had enough check marks to get marched down to the principal's office. He gets marched down to the principal's office, and what happens next? Well, they found he was being doubly reinforced because the person there at the principal's office put him next to a window, and it was right before lunch. And when the bell rang, all of these kids were coming by and giving him attention because he was kind of the cool bad kid sitting there. So he's getting a lot of attention through the window, and the kids are coming by. And so what was happening is the counselor said something like this, it's kind of predictable behavior. The boy is getting a lot of attention for doing what's wrong and not a lot of attention for doing what's right. And because of that, his behavior is predictable. You see, if you want to influence people for good, the chances that you can influence them go way up if you catch them doing something right. In other words, what we want to do is water the behaviors we want to see grow with attention. Have you ever seen a tantruming kid? Maybe you have one. Tantruming is where kids, they flail on the ground, yell and scream, trying to get attention. What they're really saying is, please give me attention. They want attention for something. Now, here's the problem. When you see a tantruming kid, a lot of times you'll see a parent who is lashing rewards or reinforcement attention on that kid. So, the mom or the dad saying, "Oh, please don't embarrass mommy here right in the store. Do you want a sucker? Do you want an iPad? Do you want a phone?" And what happens is the kid learns that when I act up like that, I get rewarded. I get attention. And one of the things they've found is that if you want to extinguish a behavior as a dad, so we have behaviors we want to see in our family that we don't want to see in our family, is to first of all, maybe have a chat with your kids about how we're going to have consequences. And if you decide to act in a certain way, this is the consequence. And if you decide to act another way, this is the consequence. But have a consequence. Have a discussion and say, you know what, when you're acting that way, you're not going to get, you're just going to have to be by yourself and have zero attention until you burn out. And let the kids sit in the corner until they burn out. Now, here's the thing. It might take 20 or 30 minutes for the kid to check and make sure the kid's not in pain. They're not sitting on a tack. And by the way, this is not counseling or professional parenting advice at all. But if they're not hurt or sitting on a tack or something's really wrong, and they're just trying to get attention because they're trying to tantrum, one of the best ways is just to let them burn out in the corner. Now, a lot of parents can't handle this. The kid's screaming for 8 minutes, and after 8 minutes, mom goes over there and goes, "Oh, I can't handle this. What can I do?" Or dad goes over there and says, "I can't handle this. What can I do?" And what if you just taught the kid? You taught the child that if he screams for 8 minutes, he'll get attention. Maybe letting him burn out in the corner would be great. Now, remember, the real principle is not just to ignore behaviors we don't want. The real principle is to catch people doing something right. So this needs to be first and foremost, this is the most important part, find things you can give your kids attention for that are positive. So in conjunction with this, when they're playing nicely, say, hey, love it when you play with your sister like that and are calm and collected. I love it when you put so much effort into your math problem. I love it how you share with your brother Johnny. Or when they've calmed down after a tantrum, you can say, hey, I like it when you're calm. What we want to do is start giving attention to the behaviors that we want to see grow. And if we do that, the chances of strengthening those behaviors go way up, and we can weaken behaviors by not watering them with reinforcement or attention. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, that's one way to build a relationship. I want to back up there just for a little bit, though. I once asked a marriage counselor, this is a guy who was supposed to help marriages, said, what do you do to influence people when you're trying to help a marriage that's on the rocks? And he didn't hesitate at all. He said, that's easy. I listen to them. Did you hear that? Listen to them. They found that if you want to emerge as a leader in an organization, any organization, including your own family, leaders emerge as they listen. Do you want to have more influence with your spouse, more influence with your children? Stop talking, be kind, and just listen to what they have to say. It doesn't mean you have to agree with their perspective. It doesn't mean you have to say, okay, it's whatever you're saying is okay to do, because maybe it's not. But when you just listen to them so that they feel understood, the chances that they'll take your suggestions later go up. Again, studies have shown that listening is one of the most effective ways to become more of a respected leader in any organization, including as a dad or as a leader in any organization. Now, there's some people who are trying to professional influence. Like, for example, in my role as a salesperson, I read of one study that showed that people who sell business to business, they actually talk way less than they listen. Whereas unsuccessful salespeople are talking most of the time. So let me ask you this. As a dad, how much are you talking? How much are you listening? And do you think you could listen a little bit more? I believe there was some research out of Harvard that showed something like this. They said, the person who is talking the most is the one who's enjoying the conversation the most, whereas the person who is asking the most questions is the one who's most liked. Is that interesting? So in any relationship, if you want people to enjoy the conversation, let them talk more than you. And if you want them to like you or esteem you, maybe ask more questions. Now, that's not to say as dads that our job is to be liked and buddies. That's not our job. We're dads. Sometimes we need to set boundaries that are clear. Sometimes our children won't like what we're doing, and that's okay. Our job is not to be a buddy friend with our kids. Our job is to give our kids the best chance we have of having a successful life. And sometimes that means saying no, and sometimes that means they may be mad at us. But it also means if we want to influence them, to really listen is huge. Now, one of the other things we could do, exceeding expectations. Let me give you an example. And we're going to move on to this pyramid, but we've got to talk about this for a second. In life, we have what are called expectations. And we also have what sometimes comes in as reality. So here's an expectation that I have. And if my reality comes in lower, what's the distance between these two lines? Well, the distance I call it frustration. Okay, so if I expect something and my reality comes lower, I'm frustrated. If we want to influence our children for good, if we want to influence our spouse for good, if we want to influence anybody for good, we don't want people to be frustrated, because we want them to instead have positive associations with working with us. And if we're setting an expectation, in other words, if we tell our child we're going to do something, tell our spouse we're going to do something, and then we don't follow through, we have a frustrated spouse, we have a frustrated child. To be a good dad, we at least need to keep these lines the same, which means we need to walk our talk. As you can see on the screen right now, we need to do what we say we're going to do now, and be honest. So if I say I'm going to show up and take you and do something with you, I'm going to do it. That makes it so I don't have a child frustrated at me, spouse frustrated at me. Now, if you want to be a great dad or great influencer in any situation, we've got to learn to flip these lines. Flip the lines. In other words, we don't want to make people's reality better than they expect. And if we do that, we'll have, not instead of frustration, we'll have delight. We'll have people who are delighted to be with us because their reality when they're with us is better than what they expect. Let me give you one example. My wife, several years ago, said she was missing her family. And she said it quite a few times. Now I'm kind of a slow learner, and finally I picked up on this. And she was saying how much she missed her family. They happen to live a couple states away from where I live in San Diego. Now, after she said this a number of times, I thought, oh, maybe this is an opportunity for me. And so I actually called up her parents and said, hey, I'm thinking about maybe surprising my wife and sending her down to visit you. But don't tell her that I'm going to do that. And then we figured out some days that would work. Then what I did is I secretly bought a plane ticket for my wife and had my oldest daughter help pack a bag, so I made sure I had all the right stuff in it. And said, you know what, I'm going to see if I can surprise her. Now, it was during the holiday time where people go downtown in the city where I live near, and they sometimes like to see the lights. And I needed an excuse to get my wife near the airport so I could pull this surprise on her. Okay. And so I told my wife, hey, let's go see the lights downtown. And she said, oh, we've already seen them a couple times. And I had to be a little persistent. I had to say, well, kids can play with some of their cousins. If we go with some extended family, maybe we should do that. Eventually she said, okay. So we went in this car, we drove the car downtown, and we were following some of my extended family that were going to see the lights, at least we all thought. And I had the ticket in the car, I had the bag packed, my wife didn't know that. And about 3 miles before we got to this change, where you could either go one way or the other, my wife said the perfect thing. She said, I'm really missing my parents right now. And in my mind, I thought, this is great time. So I said to her, I think you should go see them. I could tell she didn't think very much about it. She just thought I was talking, Anyway, we got to this change in road, and my family went this way, and I went towards the airport. And as soon as I missed, she looked over at me and she goes, you missed the turn. I said, well, yeah, you said you wanted to go see your parents. Why don't we go take you to the airport and let you see your parents? And she thought I was just joking. In fact, she was even at the moment probably just mildly annoyed. She was like, we're going to miss the lights if you don't go. Well, we got to the airport shortly thereafter, pulled out a bag and a ticket, and I handed her the bag. Then I handed her the boarding pass. She took one look at that boarding pass and she said, is this real? And I said, it's real. She says, is this real? I said, it's real. Go enjoy your parents. I'll take the kids. Now, I didn't tell my younger kids who were in the car with me that I was doing this because I know they can't keep a secret. But my wife, she was like, is this real? Is this real? I got to tell you, I took the kids. She went and had a great time. And I got to tell you, that was one of the best things I ever did for my marriage. Now, I'm not going to go into the details, but we'll just say things were good. Why were they good? Well, because my wife's reality was better than she expected. There's research that shows when you surprise people and make their reality better than expected, feelings of goodness go through the roof. So if we want to do that, if we want to build a relationship, that's one of the things we can do. Now I want to just show on this screen here, under build the relationship, you'll notice I've got exceed expectations and truly listen. Okay, now let's talk about that for a second. To exceed expectations and truly listen. Now, my wife, in the past, I have sent flowers to my wife, trying to do something nice for her. Well, this is the reaction I get when I send flowers to my wife. Thanks. I mean, it's kind of just blah things. They aren't a big deal to her. Now, I've dated women before my wife, and those women, when I send them flowers, they really liked it. They thought it was awesome, but not my wife. She doesn't think flowers are that awesome. But if I want to have something, to do really, if I want to make things great with my wife, what I do is if I help around the house or if I do something extra, that's a home run. Or sending her to San Diego to see her parents was a super home run, right? But so to figure out how to exceed her expectations in a way that was super meaningful, I had to listen. And again, remember, leaders emerge as they listen. If you want to be a leader in your home, if you want your kids to respect you and to follow you on their own, and your wife, you have a better chance of having that happen if you really, really listen. And then also exceed expectations. Now, this when you see this here, remember, if we build a relationship and we really listen, then people become receptive to what we have to say. So as a dad, this is super important. We want our children to be receptive. We want our spouse to be receptive. We want those in our family that we're leading to be receptive. So the foundation of the pyramid is, first, we've got to build trust. We've got to walk our talk. Next, We've got to build a relationship, find a way to exceed expectations, and truly listen. This brings us to the next point here. Okay. There's this word called humility. Now, what is humility? Well, let me give you an example. When I got through to the bank in New York, who was it that got me treated like a king at the bank? Was it the CEO of the bank? No, it was a low-level employee, Jeff. Who got me an appointment with this high-level director in New York? It was Janice, who some people would consider a low-level secretary. She was the one who opened the key to the gate. Jeff is the one who got me treated like a king. And by the way, if you'll notice that their expectations were exceeded probably a little bit. Think about this. Jeff deals with people all day long at the bank. Some of them are irate, some of them are nice. But by the end of his interaction with me, and by the way, I'm not a genius at this. I've blown it lots of times, but I think I actually stumbled onto something here. He had an email to his boss telling him what a great job he did, catching him doing something right, which aligns with that principle of the golden rule, positive reinforcement. And it also kind of exceeded his expectations. It was a surprise. And because of that, I really think that's why I got treated like a king at the bank. Think about Janice, too. Janice is a secretary in New York. And because I had given her a compliment to her boss that was sincere, that was what got me in front of this high-level director in New York. In fact, he said, "You're the only salesperson I've ever," forgot to tell the rest of the story. He said, "You're the only salesperson I've ever let into my office. The reason you're here is because you were nice to my secretary. I talked to my secretary more than I talked to my wife." And some of these salespeople don't understand that. So that's the end of the story. Sorry we had to wait to that to get there. So exceeding people's expectation and then treating everyone like they matter. Now, how does this humility piece play into being a dad? Well, let me tell you this. You treat everyone with respect. You can be an example. Walk your talk with this with your kids. But treat your kids with respect. Let me give you something. Let me show you a quote that's really interesting. This is something to do with stocks. And of course, this isn't an investment place. This is a course to help dads. But I'm going to put this in here for Warren Buffett anyway. He said this. He said, most people get interested in stocks when everyone else is. The time to get interested is when no one else is. You can't buy what's popular and do well. Well, that's interesting. Warren Buffett got really, really rich by investing in things when other people weren't interested at all. In other words, sometimes there was a market crash and he'd be buying when the market was down. Everyone else was running away saying, hey, the sky's falling. But what if you applied this same principle to being a dad? Let's take out the word stocks and replace it with people. Look at this right here. Most people get interested in other people or your children when they become popular and successful later on. But the time to get interested and work with your children is when no one else is, when they're just kids. You can't follow what's popular and do well. You see what I'm saying? If you want to have influence on your kids, you invest time when they're young. Okay? Now, here's another quote about humility. I just want to put this out there. Looked up some things about servant leadership, which is, as dads, that's what we're trying to be. Leaders that are servants in our own home. Here's a business example. What's the best example of servant leadership you've ever witnessed? Well, a top response was, after meeting our executive director, a man in his 60s at the time, picked up a mop and started cleaning the kitchen floor. My wife was amazed and has been a fan ever since. He wasn't a perfect human. He wasn't showing off, just being himself, not a perfect human or leader, but he had some great qualities, and this was one of them. We want to talk about this. How can this apply as being a dad? If we could show the humility of saying, hey, I'm going to get down with my children, play Legos. I'm going to go spend time with them. I'm going to show them that I can serve my spouse and them by doing the dishes, by cleaning the bathroom, by serving and being humble. That increases people's receptivity to us. So here's the deal. I want my children, I want my spouse, I want to be a leader in my home and influence my family for good. Here's the pyramid. I've got to, first of all, walk my talk, which if I do, and I'm honest, the result is that people will trust me. Now, let's talk a little bit more about that trust. Why do people gossip? Well, the reason is because they're not feeling good about themselves. If they're not feeling good about themselves, then they choose to, a lot of times take that war out on others, and they say, well, at least I'm not as bad as him, or at least as bad as her. Well, here's the thing. If you're in a group of people and they're gossiping, and you're the one who decides to excuse me, if you're the one who decides to defend the person who's not there, your ability to influence people goes. In other words, if I'm sitting around a bunch of people who are gossiping and one of them says, hey, did you hear what so-and-so did? And I'm the one who says, hey, you know what? In her defense, or in his defense, I know him, I know her. And maybe she was just having a bad day, but they've done a lot of great things. They're good people. The very people who are gossiping trust me more because they know, like, let me give you an example. If you and I were in a room together and I started saying bad things about someone you know, so let's say you know somebody named Bob, and I started saying, hey, did you hear what Bob did? He did this and that and this and that. Well, if you look at me and you say, you know what, X, I know Bob, and he's a good guy, and maybe he was having a bad day. I've seen Bob do a lot of good stuff. What I now know about you is that when we have a falling out, you'll defend me behind my back. Okay? And so the fact that you defended Bob when Bob wasn't here makes me trust you more. I may not be able to articulate it. I'm gossiping, may not, but there's somewhere in my psyche I'll know that you're the kind of person who defends people behind their back. Now, think about this as it applies to families. If you're talking about any member of your family in a way that you wouldn't talk about them if they were present, frankly, you're gossiping. So you got to be really careful not to do that. Now, that very act of defending someone who's behind their back, that aligns with this principle of the golden rule. The golden rule, there's 1,000 different ways to align with it. One of them is defending people who aren't present. One of them is catching people doing something wrong. How can we align with the golden rule in all of our interactions so that our children will be receptive? When we align with the golden rule, we truly listen, and we build this relationship, people become more open to what we have to say. Okay? Now, here's the next piece. This brings us to the top of the pyramid. And I want to tell you something that maybe you don't know. Okay? Something I know about each and every one of you dads, parents that's listening to this show, this course, is that you have a battle that no one knows that you're fighting. It may be a battle that's really hard for you. It may be an addiction. It may be a struggle of something that happened in your past that you haven't gotten over. I'm going to tell you something, a battle that I fought, so you can understand what I'm talking about. Now, before I do that, I wanted to ask yourself, do you think that parents have a huge effect on their kids? So like even right now, as you're listening to this, raise your hand if you think parents have a huge effect on their kids. So I'm guessing you're raising your hand. But now I'm going to tell you a story. My daughter Cheyenne was a beautiful angel baby. She had soft, dark hair. She had deep brown eyes. And she was really, really calm. In fact, so calm that sometimes I would just have to stop what I was doing and stop and gaze and look at her. We'd kind of just lock eyes. But this feeling that I get when I look at my daughter Cheyenne and she'd look at me was just a feeling of calm. Now fast forward a little bit. My daughter Cheyenne, well, let me tell you this. I was sitting on the side of the road. I got a phone call from a stranger. The stranger said something like this. Is this X.A. Anderson? I said, it is. They said, your daughter has drowned. You need to come to the hospital. And I said, what? They said, your daughter has drowned. You need to come to the hospital. Now, got to tell you, I don't remember how that conversation ended. I don't even remember exactly how I drove to the hospital or exactly where I parked, but somehow I parked, got in, went in, saw my daughter, my 9-month-old daughter on a hospital bed. And she had tubes coming out of her nose. As I walked in, I could, there was a lot of people in that room who were not calm. I went up and I put my hand on my daughter's arm. As soon as I did that, I felt calm. Almost like she was looking up at me. Went over to one of the EMTs and said, hey, I'm a big boy. I want to know what's going to happen to my daughter. And the gentleman said, I think she's going to make a really good donor. Well, eventually, they wheeled my daughter out to this plane slowly. They weren't in a hurry. Got in a plane, flew to a specialized hospital. The plane landed, went up, and Um, Long story short, after a while, a doctor at this new specialized hospital said, "Hey, things don't look good," or something like that. For the second time in my life, I got to see someone I love be taken off of life support. They put my daughter in my arms, and I held her until she was gone. Now, kind of a tough and involved guy, you may not have guessed that I've had that experience, seen my daughter die. Um, but here's the truth: everybody you know, everybody you see, even your children sometimes have a pain that you don't know about. And so, way to remember that as we go forward for just a second here. The top of the pyramid here is to speak the truth. Now, you'll notice I could have just said parents have a huge effect on their kids. And I asked you before I asked this. I said, raise your hand even if you're just sitting alone there watching this. If you think parents have a huge effect on their kids. And I could have put it on a slide. Parents have a huge effect on their kids. But when I told you a story, do you think you'll remember that more? The answer is when we speak the truth and we use the story, people will remember it more. And one of the reasons I told you that is because I wanted to share something with you so you know I was being real with you. But I also wanted you to remember when you're teaching your own children to use stories. The best teachers in all of history did that. Jesus did it. People all across history who wanted to influence use stories, and it's helpful. Now, when we speak the truth, a lot of times with stories, the end result is that we have influence. Now, here's the point I want to make as a dad. A lot of times people, they say, oh, I have this problem with my teenager. I have this problem with my child. And I'm just going to go talk to them. And they start at the top of the pyramid saying, I want to speak the truth. But they haven't built the rest of the pyramid. They haven't gone in and actually acted trustworthy. In fact, if they're honest with themselves, a lot of times they've told their kid one thing, but they act a different way. Like, don't be angry, but they're angry all the time. Don't be on your phone, but they're on their phone all the time. And they wonder why their kid is doing the exact same thing that they're doing if they're honest with themselves. Okay? I've seen this happen in my own life. You've got to align with principles so that people will trust you. If you want to influence your children, your spouse for good, walk your talk. Be honest. There's no other way around it. That's how we got to do it. And then build the relationship. We do this by really listening. Listen way more than you talk. You might even decide to restate and say, let me tell you what I'm hearing you say. I'm hearing you say that you're frustrated, and these are the reasons. Is that right? And they might say, well, you are kind of right, but you missed this one point. When they said it, say, oh, I'm sorry. Then restate that one point. So did I get it right? Did I understand where you're coming from? When people feel understood, and like you really listen to them, not just talk at them, not just bark at them, telling them what to do, the chances that you'll have influence as dad go way up. Okay? Then after that, we need to be humble enough to pick up a mop, to go work, to go clean around, do stuff to help, and to invest in our children while they're young. At some point in the future, I'll tell you, your children are probably going to be amazing, awesome people, and everybody's going to want to be around them, I should say. And time with them may go way down. The time to invest is not when they're adults. Now, they're adults and you didn't invest when they were young, you can still do the best you can now. But the time to invest is when they want you to come play with them. When they say, hey, Dad, will you come throw the Frisbee? Will you play blocks with me? There will be a time where your children don't ask you that question anymore. It's a short time. We've got to take advantage of it. And then we've got to speak the truth. Tell them what they need to hear so that they can be good, productive citizens in society. And then we'll have influence. But you can't forget this. Now, I told you the story about my daughter, Cheyenne. I want to tell you one more story, just so you know this. Stephen Covey, I heard this story, and I hope I'm telling the story right. He said something like this. Stephen Covey, by the way, wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Great book. Go read it. But in this book, he told a story something like this. He was at a conference of some sort or speaking engagement of some sort. Somebody came up to him after the conference and said something like this. He said, I don't love my wife anymore. Stephen Covey looked at the guy and said, well, then love her. The guy said, I don't think you heard me. I've fallen out of love with my wife. She's fallen out of love with me. We're probably heading for a divorce. We have 3 kids. It kind of concerned me. And Stephen Covey looked at the guy and said, if you're not feeling it, that would be a good reason to love your wife. The guy said, how do you love someone you don't love? Stephen Covey said, my friend, you're acting like love is a feeling. Love's not a feeling. Love's a verb. If you'll do the verb, the feeling will follow. Now, I've probably paraphrased the story a little differently, but the point is this: you can lead your feelings. If you're not in love with your spouse, you're not feeling it, the answer may not be to get a divorce. The answer may be to go do the dishes, to go give her a foot rub, a back rub, go take the kids, let her go on a vacation. Do something to show her that you love her, and your feelings can increase. Does that make sense? That's the same with your children. If you're not feeling like being a good dad, if you're not feeling like aligning with principles, you're not feeling like being honest, you're not feeling like doing something nice, the answer is, if you do the verb, the feeling will follow. Let me give you one more example. I have a friend named Brody. Brody did some kind of workout. I think it was called the Spartacus workout or something like that, which is a workout that apparently is really, really hard, leaves you sore, lasts a while. He did this workout. He did it, and he said he was so sore he wanted to die. He could barely walk. But he committed to do it. So he did it again the next day. Still so sore, he could barely walk. He did it again the next day. And he's still so sore. He did it again, and he hated it. He did it again, and he hated it. He did it again, and he hated it. He did it again and again and again. And finally, he got to the point where he said, it was really interesting. I hated this workout. It just was awful. But something around 2.5, when I kept doing it, somewhere around week 2.5 or 3, things changed. He goes, and I said, do you remember the day? He goes, I don't remember the day. He goes, I got to the end of the workout. Instead of hating it, he goes, for the first time, I felt like I was just getting started. That day, I did the workout twice. I felt good. I loved it. Because it happened again the next day. I got to the end of the workout and did it twice. I loved it. You see, Brody led his feelings. Can you imagine someone saying, I'm not going to work out until I feel like it. I'll just wait for the feeling to walk by. Well, if you just wait for the feeling to walk by, you'll probably never work out. It's important to work out before you feel like it. And it's the same principle in relationships. If you're not feeling love for your spouse, if you're not feeling love for your children, if you're not feeling love for someone, the answer is to act as if you love them and lead your feelings. That brings us to this last part of the pyramid, which we talked about. Everyone you meet has something that you don't know that might be hard for them. You may not have guessed that I had, had a daughter die from drowning, but I'm here to tell you I have. Well, everyone you meet has something that you can't tell right off what that is. And so the answer, I'm going to put this up on the board here, bottom of the pyramid, underneath everything is loving, just choosing to care. Now, can you choose to love people in your family, even when at the moment you may not feel like you love them? The answer is yes. You can lead your feelings. If you're not feeling love for your spouse, act as if you are, and your feelings eventually will catch up. Not feeling love for your children, act as if you are. Your feelings can catch up. And then treat everyone, including your children and your spouse, as if they have a battle that you don't know about, that they don't see. And if you do this, your ability to influence will go way up. Welcome to the movement to be a good dad. I'd like to personally welcome you. The world needs dads like you to step up and to be present. The problems we see in our society today, violence or people committing crimes or stealing or hurting other people. These problems, almost all of them started in homes where dads were not present. Some people think government's going to fix it or the next politician or social programs, but the truth is what we really need are dads, good dads who step up and say, in my home, it's going to be good, and I'm going to teach principles. Welcome to the movement. We need people like you. My name's X.N. Anderson, and I'm committed to do everything I can to help good dads like yourself be even better. If you need to step up, be a good dad, I know you can. You've got this.